morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. We're actually going to have Jessica Burbank in studio a little bit later, so there'll be 3 chairs around this table. It's always exciting when that happens.
Yeah, I love to have a little backup today. Are you ready? Are you ready for us, Robby?
Oh Lord, yeah. Left on one side and more left on the other. Take it away.
We're defying physics here today. All right, well, Robby, the Biden White House will develop the first national strategy to counter Islamophobia, Vice President Kamala Harris shared in a new video. Let's watch.
For years, Muslims in America and those perceived to be Muslim have endured a disproportionate number of hate-fueled attacks. As a result of the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, we have seen an uptick in anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-Semitic, and Islamophobic incidents across America, including the brutal attack of a Palestinian-American woman who was Muslim and the killing of her 6-year-old son. A senseless act of violence that the Department of Justice is investigating as a hate crime. For so many people in our nation, the past few days and weeks have brought about all too familiar fears. Fears that they will be targeted, profiled, or attacked simply because of who they are, how they worship, or how they look.
Now, per the White House, the strategy will be a joint effort led by the Domestic Policy Council and the National Security Council to, quote, counter the scourge of Islamophobia and hate in all its forms. Now, as you can probably guess, the initiative is already earning some ire online. Journalist Caitlin Johnstone tweeted in response, simultaneously carpet bombing Muslims in Gaza while rolling out a national strategy to counter Islamophobia in the U.S. is the most liberal thing that has ever happened. Meanwhile, commentator Ben Shapiro replied on X, quote, the worst slaughter of Jews and the greatest spike in global anti-Semitism in 80 years, and the White House is rushing to talk about Islamophobia.
We'll get into more on what Arab Americans and the international community's reaction has been to Biden's views on the conflict later in the show. But meanwhile, a new report in the Washington Post finds that Jewish people in America and around the world are facing a spike in violent assaults and harassment as Israel's offensive unleashes anger. Quote, over the past couple of weeks in Berlin, a Jewish center was firebombed. In Paris, at least 9 synagogues and Jewish schools received bomb threats. And in New York, a man on a 42nd Street subway platform punched a woman in the face because, quote, you are Jewish. And apparently, Christopher Wray, of the FBI director, had testified, I think just yesterday, that Jews are 2.4% of the population and supposedly account for 60% of all religious-based hate crimes. But here's my question. I don't know what is actually the White House going to do on Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or anything else, because we have to carefully distinguish some different things here. Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, none of those are illegal. It's hateful. You can be against it, but the First Amendment protects hateful speech. Now, if it moves into the category of crime or violence, if you commit a vandalism or you assault someone because you're Islamophobic or anti-Semitic, that's already illegal. So I don't know what the point of this is. We can't the federal government does not have a mandate to chill speech that is either Islamophobic or anti-Semitic. I think we've been down this rabbit hole so many times with them going after misinformation or COVID misinformation or Russian content on social media. So when I hear they're going to target Islamophobia, I don't know what they're actually going to do. But what in practice it will probably be, my guess, is it's going to be a lot of very annoying outreach to social media companies about, the hate on your sites, which is unconstitutional. It's for them to do that.
Well, I think the main point, and this is what Caitlin Johnson, who's a leftist, was getting at in the quote we read from her earlier in the read, is that they're not going to do anything. It's a performative, symbolic measure that is most likely a reaction to the horrible poll numbers that the White House is seeing among Muslim Americans, especially in states like Michigan, where they absolutely needed the 58% of Muslims, Arab Americans that voted for Biden in 2020 to win that election. So I hear your concerns about weaponizing speech and the like, but what I think the most accurate, cynical read on this is that it's just a too late, much too little, much too late, solve attempted to assuage Muslim Americans who feel completely abandoned, as, of course, America sends billions and billions of dollars of aid to Israel while doing kind of a messaging bill for Muslims at home, when the only person who, at this moment, God willing, and I hope this continues to be the case, has been actually killed by any of the growth in hate following October 7th has been the 6-year-old Muslim American boy in Chicago. I do wonder what you make of the strategic value of the White House saying, we're going to do this messaging bill at this time, when Muslim Americans have been pretty clear about what it is they're upset about right now.
Yeah, I don't know that it will have any strategic value whatsoever. I guess I would be, for it to be merely ineffective would be welcome news to me. Again, what I think they actually mean is cracking down on, like, they're not distinguishing between what is protected, I mean, because they often fail to do so, between protected speech and actual, and you don't need to make it about Islamophobia. You can just you should crack down on violence, which is already illegal, or vandalism, or harassment to the extent it crosses the line at actually illegal content. I don't understand what is the point. It doesn't seem like they have a good grasp either on the extent of the problem. And again, I'm going to both sides this. Both advocacy groups that care about anti-Islamic speech and also anti-Semitic speech are perpetually representing the situation as hateful language and hate incidents in schools, and then hate crimes are always getting worse. They have every incentive to reach that conclusion. When the FBI tracks these things very improperly, they're tallying. Actually, I think it was the first radar I ever did for Rising was looking at how the FBI tallies hate crimes. What you find is that over time, municipalities just get better at reporting because it's voluntary. So then it looks like hate crimes are increasing, but it's actually just we're paying more attention to a problem that was underlying. And again, you find out that this is not a particular, I say this all the time, but ideologically motivated crime and violence is not a particularly large category. So to me, it feels like focusing on something that isn't that much of a problem. Certainly violence is a problem. Certainly crime is a problem, but they're like looking at a narrow slice of it. And then they're also looking at it from a speech violating lens. I mean, that's what in practice, that's what they end up doing. They end up sending, guidance to organizations that, that to me violate the First Amendment. So you're right. Strategically, maybe it's all geared at winning back Muslim voters. I can't imagine
good
Kamala Harris promising anything to them is going to be what they want to hear right now.
Yeah, I think there was a little sophistry going on here. I was talking to a Jewish friend about this yesterday, actually, about the stat about the largest percent of religious hate crimes happening against Jewish people in America. And we both were thinking to ourselves, well, aren't Jewish Americans the largest religious minority group, non-Christian minority group, and what you expect in a country that's overwhelmingly Christian, there to be limited crimes against members of their own group, or at least on a religious basis.
Right.
So that does also feel like a weird kind of parsing of the term. Who else would be the victim of religious hate crimes in the United States of America?
Right.
The even smaller percentage of Muslim people, the even smaller percentage of Zoroastrians. I mean, who are we talking about here? And I also have seen a real eagerness for many of the folks who decried safetyism, called college students snowflakes, really hitting this. College kids are suffering, Jewish kids are scared, Jewish kids are trembling, or something like that. Was akin to that was the title of an op-ed in a major paper last week. And clips have been being really misleadingly circulated. I saw one that claimed to represent Harvard students harassing Jewish protesters on campus. Someone zoomed up and had a drone angle of the event. There had been a lion by pro-Palestinian protesters. Some Jewish students, I don't know if they're students or not, but some Jewish protesters had come and tried to disrupt that. And there's a nonviolent technique where you basically hold your hands up and use a cloth and try to guide people away from the protesting crew, the disruptors away. And they were doing that, but they had only filmed the people with the sheets following the Jewish people around, and they were acting like they had been just chasing them around campus for no reason. So you're getting a lot of this and really exploiting what I think can be a pretty sincere and genuine fear. A lot of minority groups feel unsafe in the world and have always done so. But seeing right now, after years and years of eye rolling about the concerns that myriad groups have raised about their experiences as minorities in America, suddenly seeing the very groups that belittled that approach full-throatedly defend every concern that is being raised, whether in good faith or not, from the Jewish community seems incredibly politically motivated and pretty frustrating.
Right. Although, again, the White House is doing the opposite, right? They're catering to the concerns or the fear, regardless of how legitimate it is, and in fact, not very legitimate, of the Islamic community.
Yeah, that's what the White House always does.
Yeah.
You can say, I'm going to pass a messaging bill to stop Asian hate, or I'm going to do a messaging bill
I opposed that as
for...
well. I spoke out against that. I celebrated Josh Hawley for opposing it.
Or you can do a messaging bill about Islamophobia, but you have to follow where the money goes. And I think a lot of Black Americans are frustrated because we don't even get messaging bills. So there are a lot of people that are very upset with the White House because they see what their priorities are. And you see what the priorities are in the budget. There was a famous, I think, AOC staffer used to say, the budget is your policy document. That really shows your intent. And the intent here, whatever you want to say about wanting to protect Muslims here at home, is that you want to fund Israel and its actions, and the actions are, in the last 3 weeks, killing more children than have been killed in all global conflicts over the last 3-year period since 2020 is the stat right now. That is, I think, what Muslim Americans are focused on.
Well, meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the Congressional Budget Office found that Speaker Mike Johnson's $14 billion cuts to the IRS actually won't offset Israel spending at all. Per a CBO report, the Speaker's new bill will add $12 billion to the deficit in the next decade, whereas cuts to IRS will actually decrease revenue by $26 billion. That's according to the CBO. All in all, the gross cost to American taxpayers for Johnson's bill is $90 billion. The Washington Post's Jeff Stein reports that the IRS has been ramping up audits of taxpayers with more than $1 million in income and $250,000 in outstanding tax debt.
Yeah, we alluded to this a little bit yesterday. I think this was the issue. The whole point of funding the IRS was because historically it has been the case, and it continues to be the case, that when you funded enough to prioritize investigations that go after the people with the most money, who also have the most resources in terms of lawyers and accountants to hide their money and exploit tax loopholes, you can get more returns. And so there was actually a estimated gain of recouping taxes that had not been paid that was built into these budget estimates. And when you then say you're going to cut the IRS budget, you actually end up losing money. So that's what we're seeing here. And people are now exposing this line that Johnson put out there saying, well, we're going to be able to offset, when in fact the offsets aren't going to pan out in reality, according to the CBO.
Yeah, I don't want to give the money to Israel or any other foreign country regardless, and I essentially don't want to squeeze taxpayers at any income level harder than they're being squeezed now. So this is not my favorite combination of things anyway.
Is it squeezing taxpayers if it's just requiring them to pay the taxes that the law already requires them to pay?
I want all taxpayers to pay fewer and less taxes.
But right now, if you know that wealthier taxpayers are evading their taxes more than poorer taxpayers, isn't it better to have wealthier taxpayers not be the one that have the better end of the stick, basically, when it comes to paying their fair share in America?
I want lower income Americans to have the same advantages that wealthier Americans have.
All right. Well, before we go, we have some updates out of the Middle East for you. Obviously, the conflict is ongoing there. Hundreds of foreign citizens and dozens of injured Palestinians were permitted to flee Gaza after the Rafah Gate border crossing was opened for the first time since Israel's bombardment campaign began. Per the Palestinian Health Ministry, this comes after nearly 200 people were killed in 2 separate strikes on the Jabalia refugee camp, bringing the total number of Gazans killed since October 7th to over 9,000. Additionally, 5 more hostages held by Hamas were released alive yesterday. Further signs the 2 sides could come to an agreement to actually stop fighting with a formal ceasefire. However, that remains unappetizing, it seems, to everybody in America's government, from the top on down, with a few exceptions in the House.
Well, we'll discuss that next. More Rising right after this.